But we're wrapping this up with a discussion around foundations and foundation roles in what we were trying to do here over the last 2 days. First, admission, I am not Colin Min. Colin, who is the Senior Program Officer at the Gates Foundation, couldn't make it, so in the theory of other duties is assigned, I'm trying to fill in today. And I have to tell you that the panel doesn't realize it, but you've dodged a bullet, because I was on a panel that Colin was moderating at the first conference that we did. And the theme was on partnerships between housing authorities and their school districts. And Colin had myself and the head of one of my school districts up on stools, the front of the room, and he announced that he was going to do a format from the dating game. And he wanted us to look deep into each other's eyes and talk about what we were feeling the first time we met. So I'm not going to do that. But what we have here today is we have 3 foundations whose reach nationally is impressive. I mean, these are truly 3 of the agenda-setting foundations in the country. And there's an interesting challenge for foundations in the sense that they both set the stage and drive the agenda on the national level. And I think the story we heard this morning about Patty Stonecipher from Gates making a phone call and starting the ball rolling on a whole issue of graduation. But on the other hand, they're also charged with listening really hard down in the community and figuring out where they lead and where they have to empower things that are really coming up from below. So I think that's the theme that we will come back to as we discuss this today. Who we have with us, the Casey Foundation, which many of you know from the work they've been doing in leadership in reading and early education, and also the deep dive place-based initiatives that they've been doing in many of the poorest communities around the country. We've got Robert Wood Johnson. Really, my experience with them goes back to when they were one of 3 foundations that founded the Corporation for Supportive Housing, and currently they are funding the partnership between the Corporation for Supportive Housing and CLPHA, which is driving the initiative with United Health that we're about to embark on. And the third, finally, last but certainly not least, is Kresge, which is helping to fund this event, and also brings us Fred Karnas, who I have to tell you is considered a national treasure by those of us in the field. And is truly behind many of the intersector collaborative things that have come out of HUD and the housing movement in the last 25 years, I deeply suspect Fred's fingerprints on. But because I have no bios for anybody, I'm going to just quickly ask you to go down the row and introduce yourselves.
Hi there. Good afternoon, everybody. And I agree, the point around the energy at the end of day 2, post-lunch, I mean, this is wonderful. My name is Amoretta Morris, and I am the Director of National Community Strategies for the Annie Casey Foundation. And it is really an honor to be here, and particularly to be one of the closing conversations for this gathering, because I've been, I think, to 3 of the 4 of these. I want to say I might have been traveling for number 2, but this has always been a really central space for me in the work that Casey's been doing and in helping us support our partners on the place-based side of the shop. And that's really where I exist. In National Community Strategies, we are partnering with people and programs and public systems to advance child and family well-being. And so kind of our work is really about putting families at the center of community development and neighborhood transformation, which is exactly what you all have been talking about for the last 2 days. And so just excited to be here in this part of the conversation, thinking about what our role really can be and how you can push us to play that role more effectively.
Hello, my name is George Hobor at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Thanks to CLPHA for having me here. I really appreciate it. I think you all know about the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, so I'll just say my role in it and some background. I'm relatively new to philanthropy, so I've only been there 8 months. So when I speak for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, there's a long history there that I haven't quite caught up to, but I'll do my best to give you the best information of what I know now. So I am a sociologist by training, and I was hired as a data person, which was interesting because Robert Wood Johnson Foundation didn't really have a tradition of hiring program officers based on expertise, and recently they did, and I happen to be one of them. So I really appreciate the data conversation that's been ongoing through this. And I've had a varied route to get here. I've been on the looking for grants side, coming from Louisiana Public Health Institute, where we worked on very hard to get partners within the South to think about housing as health. And so, it's difficult to make that translation, and especially in that environment where we're in. But prior to that, an academic background and also a background in some think tank time and policy work. So I'm happy to be here and happy to be a part of this conversation.
Hi, I'm Fred Karnas, and I'm a senior fellow at Kresge, and I'm never sure whether that's just a job title or a description. If you want to know about housing, see that senior fellow on the second floor. The Kresge Foundation has been around for nearly 100 years, and for the first 80 years or so, we were a capital matching foundation. So if you were building a building at your college or a hospital campus or whatever, you'd come to us, and there'd be some formula apparently that they used to pitch in. But for the last 12 years, we've been focused on vulnerable populations in America's cities, and we have 6 teams that work on a variety of areas. An environment team that works on climate impact, on climate change impact on vulnerable populations. I work primarily with the health team and the human services team, but I do work across all the teams, and so it's been good to connect with a number of folks that are working on the education side with us now. And most of all, I was at the first of the CLPHA meetings, and to see the trajectory over the last 4 years is pretty amazing to see. Some of my old federal friends here, as well as the nonprofit world. I just think we've come a long way. There's a lot more to do, but this is a pretty impressive room, so I'm glad to be here.
So the theme of the conference has been cross-sector collaboration around housing, education, health, and nobody has been in this room for the last day and a half doubts that these are complex, multifaceted issues that require multi-sector collaboration. From where you sit in terms of both the strengths and the challenges that kind of approach, cross-sector collaboration, involves, what do you see the Foundation's role in both overcoming the challenges and supporting the opportunities?
I think it can be and should be multifaceted. The reason why I asked you to, in my introduction, really to push us is because I mean it, is that, and it sounds, I think because of the way we normally think about the relationship between philanthropy and grant seekers, that's not often what comes to mind, but it really is about asking you to expect more of us in relationship with you and in relationship with community. Before I came to philanthropy, I was a youth organizer and working in community, and then I was in local government, but I still bring the same social justice lens to all that I do. And so one of my personal sheroes is Audre Lorde, and she says that one of the quotes that she says that there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because people don't live single issue lives. And that's really at the core of cross-sector and multi-sector collaborations and why we need this, right? We know that not only are the children and families that we care about not living single-issue lives, but the structural barriers that they face to opportunity are also not single programs, they're not single policies, they're not single institutions, and so it requires us to come together in order to advance equity. It comes together to really be able to bust through those barriers and get families and children on a path to opportunity. And so the role that, I think there's multiple ways that foundations can play a role in this, but the thing that, that I think has been powerful is, I would say, leverage us beyond grant dollars and ask us for more than that, because there is so much more. Because there's other capital that we have to deploy to be able to support you and support communities in doing this work. That's intellectual capital, it's reputational capital, right? It's the convening power that helps folks learn together. It's the convening power that helps folks come together and really supports and facilitates sometimes tough conversations. I've heard over the last couple days really exciting, innovative and courageous work that people are doing, where they are leading with equity, they are leading with race, they are training staff, joint training across agencies around implicit bias, right? And how that shows up in the way they're working with kids and the way they're working with tenants, and how to think differently about that. And we know that that's not easy. That's not easy no matter what community you're in. And in some communities, it's even harder than others. And there's a role that philanthropy can play in helping to massage that, right? And helping to create spaces and connect you to communities and other partners and technical assistance that can help do that. And the other piece that I'll just say quickly around that is also, thinking about the last session that just happened that I was in was about funding, these funding programs, the different supports. And so the other piece of that I would say, and that we've heard back from some of our partners, is that some of the best support that they get beyond the grant that we have for some of our partners is technical assistance that we provide around strategic fund mapping and financial planning around the work that the table is trying to do together. How do we actually inventory, how much we have, what is it we want to do, who do we want to reach, how much is it going to cost, what do we have, what's the gap, and where are the multiple sources that we can do. And that's work and time and staff hours that in already stressed, nobody has an extra FTE for that. And so that's the type of thing that we can help and foundations can help support through the consultants and other infrastructure that we have that can set you up for resources far beyond what one of us would be able to do alone. So those are some of the things that I think we can do.
So the question being, what are multi-sector partnerships are challenging, what can we do? They are challenging, and I'm going to kind of just bracket that first. I think we're going to talk about that more, but really thinking about why are we even asking for multi-sector partnerships at RWJF? And that is, we could, in a very generic sense, we could say, social problems are complex and therefore you require as many people at the table as possible. And then, but I think we're looking for a little bit more when we have a call for multi-sector partnerships. And I mention this because it's relevant to framing and thinking of how you interact with us. So one of the things that we're certainly looking for in a multi-sector partnership is, look, when we open up a call for proposals, we get hundreds of proposals that say, I have over 100 partnerships. And in my mind, as someone evaluating that, I'm just like, oh, that sounds awful. Oh goodness, like, but they're doing what we want. They have multi-sector partnerships. So really, I think, okay, we could probably do a much better job in framing exactly what is this that you're asking for, and break it down into details. So I'm going to try and do that to a certain extent. One of the things we're certainly looking for is when we call for a multi-sector partnership, we do have leadership is important to us. And I just threw at you another big concept. What does that look like? And now everyone's going to say we have 100 partnerships with leadership. But I hope not. Like, what we're really looking for, I think we might not be very explicit in saying this, but when we throw out multi-sector partnership, we want those institutions that have kind of been on the sidelines to get involved. And that's the whole point. Like, how could we mix up the traditional multi-sector partnership? And Actually, our evaluation hasn't shown we've done a great job of that, because when we look at who forms multi-sector collaborations, they're the same entities that didn't call it a multi-sector collaboration before, they just called it cooperation. But the private sector, can we get them more involved? We're particularly interested in hospitals. Like, there was the anchor institution discussion earlier on day one. Unfortunately, I wasn't there for that, but I'm aware of it. But that's a particular, like, how do you get hospitals to commit, and not just at a level of, here's our community benefits officer who is at a low rank, like, how do you get high level leadership to commit? How do you get educational institutions to think about their role in serving the community, and how do they articulate that? So multi-sector partnerships don't have to be quantity, they have to, they have to be quality, and leadership is a core component of that. The other thing is, like, we certainly call on multi-sector partnerships for advancing knowledge. So the data component is important to us for that. And earlier, I think there was a reference to blind spots. And our data sharing, like we say data sharing a lot, what we really want out of that is we're really close to getting at the type of data that is connecting community conditions to this level of organizational services to individuals and how they navigate them. And there's a whole bunch of, like, unknown space in between that. That's what we're pushing for with multi-sector partnerships around data. Show me how you're connecting those things. And this has been interesting. I'm talking way too much, and I'll pass it in a second. This has been interesting because most of the data sharing, actually I'll bracket that, and we'll hold that, and we could talk about that before. But I think the last thing is really why we're calling for multi-sector partnerships is, there is, maybe this is theoretical, the old social capital theory that in partnership, communities are better able to respond to crisis and handle social issues. Yeah, we believe in that. And so we want multi-sector partnerships for that reason, but we understand that they might not, they might fail at the given task. What we'd really like to see in the long run as a funder is, we formed those coalitions, and guess what? They were sustained over time, and they jumped to different things. Now we're building like a civic fabric. So that's kind of the way we think about it.
So I certainly agree with what both George and Amoretta have said. I don't want to oversimplify this, but I think from our perspective, ultimately, we believe that collaboration results in better outcomes for people. As a result of that, trying to frame what we do around collaboration, around multi-sector partnerships, is really designed to focus on a sort of person-centered approach. Our human services team, for example, has changed their entire strategy from sort of funding large organizations, this sort of thing, to really looking at how you can build these cross-sector partnerships that have the person at the center, so that the individual outcome for that person or that family is the change that we're seeking. So, I see the foundation's role in incenting that in a variety of ways, or testing models that will help us all sort of think about systems that do that better. And we've heard this conversation over the last 2 days about learning each other's language, helping bring people together to begin to learn each other's language. The data sharing piece we've certainly heard a lot about. And innovation, as I said, testing new ideas. I think the reality is, and this has been mentioned by several folks the last couple of days, is collaboration's hard work. It takes lots of time. We all have all kinds of pressures on us. So one of the things that I think foundations can do is try to create that space for folks to come together. There's not an awful lot of natural ways that the education folks and the housing folks come together, or the health folks and the housing folks, and I think that's something that the foundation community at the national level and certainly at the local level can make happen. So there's a whole lot of work we still have to do internally at the foundation level, I think, to make this cross-sector work also. And Amoretta mentioned the sort of equity conversations that I think are many of us foundations are trying to sort of think about in our own work and how we operationalize that. And certainly the race issues that have driven a lot of bad decisions in the past, both in government and in foundations that we have to work through. So all of those are pieces of cross-sector work that I think we have to focus on.
So let's stay on that theme for a moment. All three of you are here because you get it. But I think all of us have had experiences of working with foundations where the education folks think that education is only within the four walls of the classrooms, or the health folks and the transportation folks aren't talking. Where is the foundation world, and where is it going in terms of its ability to break down internal silos and really be a partner with this kind of multi-sector collaboration in the real world? And we don't have to go in order here. We can just.
No, since mine's still on, I'll go ahead. I mean, I think for us, the process of getting here was sort of an evolutionary process to begin with. There's sort of two things happened. On our health side, we started working on very micro environment kind of things in housing around health, around lead, and around asthma, and had that conversation and recognized that that may fix the problem for a particular family or individual in that house, but if the neighborhood's got all sorts of issues, and then that's not going to help a lot. So we moved up the stream on that front and saw that we had to work in areas across a variety of sectors in order to get to where we wanted to go. I think the thing that broke down the barriers, though, that you're talking about, Stephen, is the most for us was, if any of you came to us 6 years ago and said, do you fund housing? We would say, no, Kresge doesn't fund housing. We don't do housing. But we were having a conversation among some of our program officers one day, and they said, we just funded this housing program through the environment program around energy. And somebody else said, well, the human services team has just funded CSH for something. And the health team said, well, we've been working with housers around lead in a number of communities. And so our CEO said, we don't do housing, but maybe we ought to find out whether we actually do housing. We discovered that in the first 6 years after we moved from the Capital Matching Foundation to our current framework, we'd spent $100 million on housing that we didn't know about. And that was simply because, as everybody in this room knows, every one of the outcomes we were looking for in education and in health and in human services and in the environment required stable housing to get to. And so that was what transformed our thinking. There's a lot of internal operational work that still needs to happen to be able to work together better. But from a philosophical standpoint, we began to understand that housing was a key element. And when we have now acknowledged that and created a housing work group, we chose not to create a separate housing team, but to embed housing across all teams.
So how we got here is, and what are the challenges? I think we're struggling with this internally still. How we got here was, county health rankings and roadmaps is a signature product, and there's a model in there that says these are all the things that lead to your health outcomes, and then there's this box of social and economic conditions accounts for like 80%, and researchers get really angry with county health rankings. They're like, how did you get to that 80? And there's all this method, but that's not the point. The point is the message. It's not for methodological quibbles, but in realizing that opened the door for, okay, RWJF has to account for that social economic box. And so that's how we've gotten to multi-sector partnerships, and all of a sudden now housing, there's been a history there anyway, but now it's a really focused, like how do we take our history and align it with what we want to do, and especially now that we're undergoing new leadership, we have for the last year, we're in this bit of realignment of, okay, we know we have to have multi-sector partnerships reaching beyond our kind of healthcare box to new organizations within different sectors. What does that look like? Do we do poverty work? I don't know. Do we do housing work? I don't know. This is an ongoing conversation, and it's kind of a joke internally because some folks will say, well, we don't do community violence, and then someone will be like, yeah, we have. So we haven't quite figured out exactly where we're going on. These are our core strategies. This is most important for multi-sector work. We just know we kind of need it once that box there was like, this is what's accounting for your health outcomes and health behaviors. So it's in the works, but I can say housing has been identified as a core starting point. And it's funny to say starting point because, of course, there will be people in the foundation that'll wave their hands and said, we've been doing it. Well, now we're going to do it in a more focused way. So economic vitality is another one that's opening up. But we're struggling with what we want out of multi-sector partnership focus. So.
We definitely appreciate being one of in the club of folks who you think get it. For us, I would say, and I don't necessarily want to own that, because with all of this, right, we're on a learning journey, and we just happen to be more transparent about it, I think, than some folks in terms of where we've chosen to put a stake in the ground. I think relative to our process of internal silo busting, and then also then I'll say a comment around cross foundations, and in the sector, that I can personally say with, my team knows that we had a moment when I just really had to push us to eat our own cooking. We were doing whole family 2-gen work. We were asking partners to be more integrated, be more aligned, be more collaborative, but their experience of us as a foundation was everything but that, right? Their experience of us was siloed, fragmented, right? Kind of touching different program officers, touching different parts of the work or different streams. And so for us, we had to think about, here are the frameworks and the tools that we're offering you to show up in a more aligned, seamless way for families. What does it look like for us to turn those tools back on ourselves to show up in a more aligned, seamless way for communities, for our grantee partners, and those that we feel ourselves accountable to? And that's a lot of hard work that because our internal structures, our org charts aren't necessarily set up for that. I come from a national foundation. Well, we all do on this panel, but we're frankly just schedules. Right? We're constantly in the air and traveling. We're never in the office together for those water cooler conversations that help to grease the wheels on some of that. And so it takes a lot of intentionality in order to be able to do that in a way that makes sense, in a way that is less burdensome, frankly, for communities. And so that's work that we absolutely are still doing, and how that happens. I'll say, in terms of the end of your question, I think you asked about kind of the future of the field in this as other people are taking this on. And a piece of that, I'll say, is in more, frankly, what I would say as more funder collaboratives. And you've heard a little bit about that in some of the work that has come up, and things that have been highlighted and supported with some existing funder collaboratives. But I mean, that's what happens when, as a sector, we turn up the spotlight and make a deeper commitment again to advancing equity and what that looks like. Because once you do that, that actually means getting at the root causes of issues. And if you're getting at the root causes, if you're disaggregating data, you're looking at disparities, you're making a commitment to close that gap, that actually involves doing a factor analysis that's going to land on things that are not a single program, are not in one single portfolio. And so for us to then develop a strategy to address that is going to take potentially not just multiple portfolios in a foundation, but it's also often going to take more than one foundation. Because the other part of that, and this is also something that we say to partners, when we're asking them to have a structural analysis and to think about systems and not just kind of think that they're going to program and service their way out of poverty, right? We're not asking people to assume that they have to do everything. But what we're trying to say is, how do you at least have a framework and an understanding that is big enough that you understand what your role is and how you're contributing to the outcome that we want? And so as individual foundations, we need to be able to understand what our role and our contribution is to the bigger picture and how we are contributing alongside other funders, alongside public agencies and government, alongside the private sector to get us where we want to go. But unsurprisingly, that can be difficult. Y'all know us. I mean, we've got ego, we've got this, like everyone wants to have first position, they want the shiny thing. I mean, if that person's there, do I want to go there too? Because then am I going to really get credit? And that's the part where if the outcome that we want, right? And our commitment to opportunity, our commitment to child well-being, in our case, for Casey, our commitment to child well-being and family well-being is at the center, then that other pieces become subservient, right? It becomes high impact, low ego. And that's what we really need in order to do this work together.
So let me talk about another dimension of this, which is sustainability. And there was a comment made on the first presentation this morning about 10-year timeframes in terms of doing true systems change. And to the degree that we're working on creating structural relationships across sectors, I think that becomes particularly important. And foundations don't necessarily think in those kind of timeframes in terms of the support they give. How do you reconcile sort of those two tensions?
I haven't. I mean, I think that is a real struggle. I mean, I think for many of the issues that the people in this room are working on, we recognize that sort of a long focus in the right direction is required, and yet I don't think we've adjusted as a sector. Certainly we haven't as Kresge to thinking that long term. I mean, for us, a long term is 3 years. I think the first step for us to sort of pick up on one Amoretta's points is not to follow the next shiny object. And so to recognize that if we're going to make a commitment at least to an issue, that we need to stick with the issue for a long time, then the next step is sort of saying we're going to fund somebody for 5 or 10 years.
I'm sorry, I paused when you asked that question because for us, I think we do actually think in pretty long time frames, and so I think it's really more about spreading the gospel. Before I was at KC, as a youth worker and organizer, I organized around juvenile justice reform. And so my introduction to KC was actually not in the division that I'm in now. It was through our Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative work, our juvenile justice reform work, right? So we're talking 25 years, 200 plus municipalities that we've been partnering with to get kids out of locked cages. And we know that does not happen overnight, but the successes that we've seen and the thousands of kids that are because we stuck with it. It's because we stuck with communities. It's because we built credibility in the space with agencies and with communities and with young people. And so that is the type of way we think about kind of this work with others. On our, I sit in our place-based side where, our big place initiatives are multi-year. And so my colleague, Jaron Price, is in the room. He's over there, and kind of the work that he leads currently is a 9-year effort that we're in the middle of with a set of communities. And because we know that change moves at the speed of trust, and trust doesn't get built at the level that you need to do the type of work that you all are doing in a year, in a single grant cycle. It just doesn't. Right? And so we're saying, typically, if you had a year where your outcomes, where your deliverables, you're like, I just decided that this person is really in it with me. We just are establishing the fact that if stuff blows up, that this person actually, is going to stand alongside me. Again, our foundation, we started in child welfare and juvenile justice work. And so young people's lives are at stake. And if a young person dies, and, we're on the front page of the newspaper, are my partners that I'm collaborating with gonna hold that with me the same way they wanna hold success with me? And that doesn't happen in a month, in 3 months, in a 6-week planning period. And so we absolutely believe that this work takes time, and but we also know that there is an inherent tension in believing that, at the same time holding the sense of urgency that we all agree with and know and feel in our communities, right? And that young people feel and that families feel in our community. We talk about, is a foundation willing to take a risk on an investment, et cetera, and I always have to think about that and push us to really think, well, what do we mean when we say risky? Because the folks who really are taking risks, right, are your tenants. The folks who are really taking risks are your clients or families, our children that are living on the edge and need us to get ourselves together, right? And to kind of break the barriers to what's really holding them back. And so us being able to push and to build partnerships and build relationships that really can force us to have the difficult conversations so that we could do more is really important. And so what I would say is, you know, that I think we at the CLPHA Foundation believe in that longer time horizon for many things, and we definitely want to spread the gospel to others. And so, yeah, just we check, yes.
So I've got lots more questions, but we're sort of running out of time. So what I wanted to do is, because I want to leave a good bit of time for questions from the audience, I just wanted to go down the road and give each of you an opportunity to make, you've got a room full of people who are trying to figure out how to do this and how to do this in partnership with foundations, the advice and the other points that you want to make on this. Let's please do. Yeah.
Thanks. I wanted to, on that sustainability question, I didn't answer that, but I think that 10-year time frame is very closely related to a lot of foundations speak of show me impact. And that's an evaluation question in how we're going about that business. That is a totally different topic, because no, you can't really show impact in that short amount of time. But I think sustainability is we look at it a potentially different way too, such as, you know, have we opened up a sustained conversation on this topic? If you've done that, you've met the sustainability standard. The sad part for people applying for grants is that means, well, wait a second, my work is over? And that's tough. So there's a parceling out of, like, you know, that sustainability question is a little bit deeper, because it goes by programs and effectiveness. It goes on long-term goals you had that might be short, but it is also an evaluation question. So on closing, I think there are some challenges to multi-sector partnerships. I know that was a part of the question we didn't really get to. But I would like to close on the well, I'll close on the effectiveness piece, on the data and challenges. This is a thing I struggle with a lot, because I almost think by saying show me impact, we haven't, I'll say from our experience and how we administer our grants, I don't think we've realized that we've asked grantees to take up a totally different type of research that requires a different skill set. And we haven't changed our amount of money that we want to throw at that. And I've also, in a dinner conversation last night, I've equated this to a labor force problem, like where also, like, you want people to do impact research. Who's doing that for the nonprofit sector? Like there's a cottage industry of consultants that they do it with varying quality, and then there's academic partners that also do it with varying quality, and there's a huge gap in this multi-sector partnership thing tied to effectiveness and evaluation that I'd really like us to clear up in the future. That's a huge challenge.
So I think I'll say two more things before questions. In the scale, in my mind, there's about 3 problems that I think cross-sector partnerships are solving for. Not the only 3, but just that are top of mind for me right now. One that I've talked a lot about, and that's just the fragmentation and the lack of supports, integrated and aligned supports for families and communities at scale. But then the other 2 are an opportunity for us to, 1, invest in what works, and 3, sure that residents and youth voices are at the decision-making table. That I believe that that's part of how we are going to exactly, you know, when you said it, you didn't want to oversimplify this notion of when you collaborate, you get better outcomes. We fundamentally believe that when the folks most directly impacted are at the table, that you get better outcomes. And so, I mean, and there's an opportunity for us to do both of those things together, because if we're looking at data, if we're doing our factor analysis, if we're getting at root causes, at the same table in a co-design space with young people and families, then, and also we're able to learn and be able to access the same data and information about what works, right, to do better, then they're gonna hold us accountable around investing in what works. And so that's also something that we're not doing and that we don't talk a lot about, is that sometimes we also just tolerate bad programs, right? We tolerate things that are just keeping kids busy or just doing this that maybe are well-intended and with capacity building and support could be effective, but aren't. Right? But if we know what works, then there has to be some accountability around how we actually shift our resources and invest in that. And that accountability comes when young people, when parents are alongside us and in that space with us, and that we're sharing power with them.
So just quickly, 3 sort of unrelated points. One is, I'm going to confess that I'm wired totally differently than Matt this morning. I am the non-nerd. And it's been hard for me to sort of buy into all the conversation about data. I think data is important. It certainly, I worked for Sean Donovan for several years. If you don't work, you can't work with Sean without believing data is important. But I do think Michael Mira asked a question yesterday that was really important, which is, you know, some things we already know, and we need to proceed on what we know, and not let sort of the data conversation be an impediment, which is often put before us by policy people or systems to say, we need more information before we can move forward. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. So I would just put that cautionary note on the table as we move forward. Second piece is, if we're going to do collaboration, we've got to prepare ourselves internally, both at the foundation level and in organizations, to work very differently. And that's the challenge we're working through in Kresge right now is, you know, we're doing a lot of cross-team work and cross-sector work separate from housing and education here, or housing and health. But it takes time, and it takes a different way of doing it. And your point about being on a plane, I mean, we're gone all the time, but we've got to find a way to do that differently, and everybody's going to have to find a way to do it differently if you're really going to do collaboration. And the last thing is, a number of people, you know, when you're a funder, people come up to you, as many of you have the last couple of days, and said, I hate to bother you, but, you know, we're working on this. Do that. Relationships are absolutely key to working with foundations. You know, if we're not willing to listen to you, then we're not going to get the job done. So, you know, don't think you're pestering us. You know, we're all in this together, and build those relationships. That's what, in the end, will make a big difference.
So questions?
Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. It's very insightful. I think the closing comments spoke to my heart, because one of my main questions for all of you is there a space, because we're housers, most of us, to really fund kind of the capacity building work around building multi-sector partnerships with the requisite technical assistance to guide the work? And is that something that each of your foundations either is doing, or is that something on the table that could be considered? Thank you.
So my short answer is yes. I guess the lengthier answer is that is something that we're doing. And frankly, I believe, and I think our partners, for the most part, would believe that it's that capacity building and that additional technical assistance that ends up being even more helpful than whatever the actual direct grant dollars are, because that goes further. At least
in our case, it comes after the grant. You know, that kind of the TA is not really kind of bundled as part of the package.
Okay, so for folks, if you didn't hear, what she said was that oftentimes in her case, it's coming after the grant, and so it's not necessarily bundled as a package with. And so I'd say that ours comes with, and there's So thinking about that, and so and it's across a range because it also is there's some pieces of it that are core, right? If you're working with Casey, then you gotta kind of grapple with race equity, and so we're gonna have conversations about that and think about how we all build our capacity together to address that. If you're working with Casey, you're also gonna have some facility around data because we're the Kids Count people, and we love data, you know. And so, but really, kind of are willing to come alongside and think about what does it actually mean? Like, what are you collecting now? What are you doing with, you know, what you're collecting, and what are you able to do with that? I loved Mona. On the other panel talked about HHS being data rich but information poor, and so I think that we and so I resonate with that, but I think we are trying to move from that to data rich and information rich, right? And so that's kind of the capacity building and partnership that we're doing there. But what I think we struggle, and I could honestly and transparently say we struggle with, is how to do all of that but not be what I'm going to call data gluttonous. Right? Which is just data just for the sake of it, right? That feels super burdensome, that you're always reporting, you're always collecting, right? But you're not, but we're not clear, you know, what we're going to do differently because we have this information. You know, and so let's make sure that where we're focusing and the capacity that we're building is around data and information that is actionable and that's actually going to change your behavior, the partnership, the collaborative tables behavior, so that you're not just kind of overly investing in building out something that then is more than you actually need to take action. And so, but just to say that, and there's a range of things, and the last piece around that goes to the point that I made earlier about listening to young people and families and using what you hear from them, and that is also support and training that we offer our partners, because again, for us, this is a part of inclusion, right? And how you actually operationalize that. And we know that does not come easy in our different systems and structures. And frankly, folks don't necessarily have dollars for that. Right? You have dollars that are specifically tied to programs and services, and not food for that community meeting, and not stipends for the young person who is coming to the meeting because you've decided to listen to their voice and sit at the table with them, et cetera, and that everybody other adult around the table is getting paid to be there, right? And kind of because we value their expertise and their intellect. And so, you know, push back on us and put a line item in your budget to us for that, right? To be able to honor that, and the fact that you have to get them bus tokens to get back home after the meeting, right? All of that needs to be a part of that, and it's something that we appreciate. And if folks don't appreciate it, you know, again, push them, push them, and it's our role as funders to be able to help push each other. If we say that this is what's important, and if we want communities to do this work, because we all know that the backbone function, the intermediary function, the collaborative functions, those cost, right? And so, and you really do need support for them.
I'll be quick, it's underfunded. We don't get enough money to do the work. But at the same time, think about that. Like if I went to my manager and I said, I want to give 3 times more to multi-sector collaboration work. She would say, okay, well, what's the outcome going to be? And I'm going to say, I don't know. They're going to collaborate, and it takes time, it takes trust building, and then, you know, the immediate response would be, I do have to take this to a board. And so it's not that we don't want to, it's not that we don't recognize that it takes time, it's just that there are constraints that also even hold us from even if we want to give the amount of money to the difficult work of building partnerships, building trust, getting people to really buy in and have the time to think about what they want to do and how to measure that's difficult. I would like to see how we figure that out, because you can't make a commitment to multi-sector partnerships as a key part of having an outcome and then say, well, everyone's going to get it done on $200,000 and show impact. That it's underfunded, but yeah, there's a structural issue too within philanthropy that keeps it underfunded.
Just very quickly, I think the answer for us is it's very hard for us as a national foundation to pick winners and losers at the local level. So it's very hard for us to fund capacity for a single program that's in a particular community. So oftentimes our capacity dollars go to folks like CLPHA or Enterprise or other groups that then can work with the local communities that they work with. It's just the way we're structured, and it's, we get hundreds of requests, and so we sort of look at sort of cohorts or groups of folks as opposed to individual direct line funding.
I think we have time for one more question.
So thank you. Thank you. This has been very, very interesting, and thank you for the whole program. So I don't know if you've heard of the book, The Color of Law. And when you talk about root causes and equity, what we haven't talked about here is the underlying issues of how and where we live and creation of mixed income communities and access to opportunity. And so I'm wondering how you think about that as we look at collaboration and we look at partnerships on really providing opportunity to deal with the root causes of the inequity in how we live.
Well, I'll tell you that for the last year at Kresge, we've made a real effort to sort of look at our housing work within some sort of a framework. And the framework we developed was what we're calling inclusive development. Some call it democratizing development, this sort of thing. I think for us, it's trying to strike this balance between, if you hear our tagline on NPR, it's creating opportunities in America's cities. Well, as we create opportunities, as we invest in communities to improve neighborhoods that are struggling, we're also fueling things like gentrification. We're fueling things like displacement. And so trying to figure out how we balance that then with the kinds of tools that we can work with communities to, whether it be land trusts or tax breaks of different kinds. So that's where we're coming from, is trying to sort of say, we want to see improved neighborhoods. We want to help communities. We really, truly, to get back to Amoretta's point, want to make sure that there's a community voice in all of that planning and all of that development. And it's not just about voice. It's just not just about engagement, but it's really about power. And so we really want to make sure that as we think about development, that we balance both sides of that.
I'll echo the comment on power. We do think about I'm in the healthy communities theme. Our starting point is the conditions of place. And what I said about data earlier, about like you're catching stuff at the community level and you're also catching it at the service level of organizations, that opens up just this incredible opportunity, I think, to see how the two influence each other. So basically, I think there's an opportunity now to do really creative stuff in responding to all the information we're developing out of the ease of collecting data at different levels and sharing it across spaces. So that will eventually, but I do think the interventions to get you grounded to those social conditions do involve power building, to echo Fred's point, and also policy work. And that's really what is going to push the needle. With almost everyone I've talked to here, I've said, oh, how is your policy arm related to the work you're doing with your services? And that's the connection for us, I think.
So I, echo the pieces that have been said and agree with them. When I think about the Casey's approach to place and even why we've stayed in place for multiple decades without wavering is because we believe that neighborhoods are a powerful organizing unit for change, and we also know that the inequities and the opportunities and access that folks have varies and is so dependent on place. But it's all those tensions that were initially mentioned are the ones that we grapple with as well. And so I'm glad that we landed on this issue of power to close out today's conversation, because I think that it's the current work that we are grappling with, and it is the future. It's for the sector, is how we actually grapple in an authentic way with that. I really appreciate, I'll give a shout out to NCRP, the National Center for Responsive Philanthropy. They actually just 2 days ago released a paper called Power Moves. It's not even a paper, it's a toolkit called Power Moves for the sector. And it's basically an assessment and tool for funders to really understand, how are we doing three things? How are we sharing power? How are we investing in building power? And how are we wielding power and influence in a way that disrupts structural inequities? And so it's pushing us to operate in that way, because we know that the outcomes, and Casey knows that the outcomes that we have and want for kids and families are rooted in that, and that's what our partners know. I talked about, a core competency that we believe in, if you want to work with us, is one around race equity lens. And so in our kind of 101 training sessions, every kind of place partner, one of the first things that you do is you look at the redlining map for the neighborhood that we're working in. Some folks have seen it, most have not, right? They haven't had the time to look at that and overlay it with the data on the kids and families and the various other indices and measures that they care about, and think about and really understand the history of their city and how the most chronically disinvested neighborhoods became that way, right? And kind of what were the structures. And it's by doing that then we understand that this didn't happen overnight, and thus the solutions, right, that are multi-layered are not going to happen, and get us out of it overnight. So all that to say, I appreciate the question, absolutely the book and the point, and it's one that we're grounded in, and I agree with my colleagues that the solutions to that requires us as the field, and you all as public agencies and community organizations, leaning into authentic grapplings with power.
Well, I think we easily could have gone 2 hours on this panel. We haven't even gotten to the most interesting successes and the most instructional failures, the issues of how you scale up on this, and the questions of sort of deep regulatory change, deep change in delivery systems. To hear about that, you're going to have to come back next year. So let's give the conference a big hand.
All right. Just have a couple more minutes here. I won't do the camp counselor thing again. I know you're sick of me asking you to clap your hands when you hear me. But we just wanted to thank you all for coming to the summit this year. We are interested in your evaluations. We're going to make a plug for that one more time. There's a separate sheet for day 1 and day 2. If you didn't fill out your form for day 1, please do that. Reach back in your memory, reach back in your notes. We really do respond to those, those evaluations for next year's event. I just want to say this is my first year doing the summit. Abra, I want to thank you for being a great partner planning this event. I walked into something that was already begun. A lot of you have been to summits before. I was here last year as an observer, but Abra had done 3 education and housing summits this year folded me in and our health partners. I want to thank everyone who presented, everyone who asked questions. One thing that's really great about this convening is that everyone seems really engaged on the topics, not just coming to hear what the conversation is and go to a big conference, get out of the office, really to sort of connect with each other, shake hands, exchange business cards, and make things happen. I will say that on the health front, CLPHA is really going to push forward, looking at data sharing agreements, draft MOUs. I have my own list of people I need to connect with to get samples of that and to move that conversation along like we have on the education front. I want to make myself available as a resource to all of you. You're going to come out of this summit, hopefully on the plane, you take a list of all the things you want to do and email me over the next few weeks. Tell me what you need, and we'll make it happen. But I'll leave it there. Thank you again for making my first summit a great summit. Appreciate it.
I don't have too much to add. Definitely a round of applause for Steve as well as the rest of the CLPHA staff. Yeah, I think we're really, as Steve mentioned, this is the 4th year of putting this convening together. We really take our role as a convener seriously. You all are the ones doing the work on the ground, but we're here to help connect you to each other and really push that national agenda forward. So excited to continue working with you. As Steve mentioned, I know several of you were looking for follow-ups from me. Please send me an email because I may not remember otherwise. But we're gearing up for another few rounds of strategic planning of our own that we'll be working on this summer. So we definitely want to make sure that what's important to you and what your focuses are part of what we're planning as well. So I know we've been having lots of conversations over the last several months, and that those will continue, but we look forward to it. We thank you so much for your participation, for your energy, for the work that you do every single day to really help those who are most in need in this country, the low income, all the way from prenatal up to older adults. So thank you.